Okay. This is an individual by the name of Duncan Hines. Has anyone ever heard of the name Duncan Hines? Where have you heard of it? Yes.
Like Heinz ketchup.
Yeah. And Duncan Hines cake mix. All right. So if you've ever done cake mixes, you'll find the name synonymous. There was a real Duncan Hines, and this is the individual. We know him now kind of as a caricature or what we would define as the good life. All right. So the Duncan Hines list is the finest places to go eat. It's the best places to go stay. If you've ever thought of or ever heard of the Greek legend of Epicurus, who lived the good life, that individual was Duncan Hines. So in the 1930s, he and his wife were inseparable together. They went everywhere together. He was a salesperson across the Depression in the 30s, and he drove across from his lane was from Chicago to Los Angeles. Now, if you imagine what the 30s are like in the United States, there are no chains or anything like that. Everything is very local. There's only 8 major national roads in the United States. So to get somewhere to anywhere usually was an adventure into itself. And if we all know, sometimes, an adventure is no adventure at all. It can be a disaster. And so his wife and he kept very copious notes about wherever they went when they traveled. So if they went someplace and it looked good, they made note of it. If they ate somewhere and it was excellent, they made note of it. And what happened eventually is, living the good life like he did at one of his cocktail parties, they noticed just incredibly all of this wealth of information, and they said, you both have to write a book. And so they wrote a book. And so the book was called The Guide to Good Eating, or The Best Places to Stay in America. And so this became, was one of his great books. Duncan Hines was the great first influencer in the United States. And by that, if you think of any YouTube influencer, someone whose opinion you trust, someone whose thoughts that you'll follow, the first one in the group was Duncan Hines. So this is him. And I find fascinating when you read his book, because in his introduction, he talks about what is the expectation you should have for a good night, and what is adventures in good eating, and all of those things. One of the things also is that we know with every good influencer, you don't take advertising, because if you say for someone, you're a shill. And so he wasn't a shill. And so he talked about his firm, no place listed has paid 1 cent for anything he is. He has no space to sell in his books. And so what makes for comfortable lodging? He puts it down, and I think, it's great. He says cleanliness, quietness, comfortable beds, courteous and unobtrusive service. They're only there when you need them, and then hospitality. I think that those are great thoughts, all right? So he even says, I would consider it a great favor if you write me about any place listed in the book in which your opinion definitely should not or should be included, okay? Where somebody should not be. So in other words, if somebody gives him a downturn, he wants to know. So if you want, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back. So just to give you an idea, this is a sheet that he would have about Mississippi. And so Ackerman, Mississippi, it has the population where it is. It tells you where it is on which street. Guest houses was an example. That's the original Airbnbs, because they had those back then. Of course, this is where I grew up on the Gulf Coast of Mississippi. This is Biloxi. So back then, the population was 25,000, 85 miles northeast of New Orleans, still there. So these are actually 3 hotels that I remember growing up with. 2 of them tragically have been lost in the hurricanes, but the White House is still there. So opened December 24th, September 10th, an old hotel, the type that guests return to yearly. 114 rooms in the main building, 54 cottages, mostly WB. It's, oh gosh, with that, excuse me, that's what it means. For $3 to $13 a night, I'm trying to get that now. Pets Preferred, Broadwater Beach Hotel, 4 miles south, open August 26th, modern, 5 units, give voters about everything the heart could desire, and it was a great place. Everything beautifully done, kitchenettes, all rooms with bath, meals, cottages. And so it kind of gives you an idea, of good places to go. So influencers can be very valuable. When I continue to talk about this particular chapter and finish it, this is one of the places that in the mid-50s, Duncan Hines visited. It's a little place in Corbin, Kentucky. It was run by an old man. It was out of his house and it was connected right to a truck stop. And this individual made some fine foods. So Duncan Hines, just in one little blurb, says, a very good place to stop en route to Cumberland Falls and the Great Smokies. Continuous 24-hour service, sizzling steaks, fried chicken, country ham, hot biscuits, lunch. That's what the L means, 50 cents to $1. D means dinner, 60 cents to $1. Wow, 10 cents for dinner. Anyway, so this turned this little place on fire. The old man that was running it, who was on his first Social Security check, decided that the business was growing so fast that he needed to do something now. And he'd heard about the modernness of franchising, and he said, I got to find a good lawyer. And he did, and he found one, and he started creating franchises. And the franchises were wrapped around 2 things, the quality of the food, which was number 1, and the cleanliness of the services that they had. He insisted on stainless steel utensils. If he ever walked into one of the franchises, he was known to have a volatile temper. He was known to close the franchises at that point, and legend says he would throw the stainless steel parts in the middle of the street. Who knows? Well, anyway, this elderly man by the name of Harlan Sanders started something known as Kentucky Fried Chicken. And Kentucky Fried Chicken went on to be the dominant place that it was. Now, why weren't there chicken places before? Well, this elderly man came up with a unique idea of, instead of trying to cook chicken in a regular way, he pressurized. In other words, he put it in a pressure cooker. And a pressure cooker allows you to cook at higher temperatures, but without boiling. And that's what a pressure cooker does. Interestingly enough, Chick-fil-A around the 30s, the gentleman who came up with that was in the same idea, but he was doing it with sandwiches. So anyway, Kentucky Fried Chicken blows up, comes to where it is right now. And this gentleman who used his Social Security check to buy in on his future achieved enormous success. Now he's standing here next to someone who won the #1 franchise, and this was a gentleman who was in his mid-20s. He had actually been working for Kentucky Fried Chicken since he was 12. He dropped out of school when he was 15 and devoted himself for working in the kitchens with Colonel Sanders. He said every lesson that he ever learned about how to run a franchise, he learned from Colonel Sanders, and 2 of those things were quality and cleanliness, second to none. This gentleman went on to start his own franchises, and this gentleman, who is known as Dave Thomas, the founder of Wendy's, went on to success to ultimately, by the time he retired in around 1992, have about 6,000 franchises. In 92, Dave Thomas had a horrific heart attack, and it silenced him from all of the commercials and things that he did. But he spent the last 7 years of his life devoting himself to something that he really cared about. He was an orphan. And so he started the Orphan Project with Wendy's, and it is now a multi-million-dollar firm, and it's dedicated for finding homes for children. And so this is how things go. This is the magic of what franchises can do if you're willing to try and you're in the right place. That's all I can say. Sometimes it means, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And sometimes it's good to be lucky and good. So, all right. So using that, let's load in to the very last parts of our chapter. And we will talk about, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. Talking about trends in franchise. So I've talked about the wonders of franchising, the advantages of being able to exchange personnel back and forth to each other. But is franchising always successful, which is the main question to ask? And the answer is no. Franchising has high failure rates, but not as high as running regular stores. The average is anywhere from 1 to 2 corporations only survive in the first 3 years. The average for franchises is 1 out of 4 in 10 years. So the odds are slightly higher. Did I stay? Flip the screen. Stay. Okay. So how do you survive? Logically, the older the system you're with, and the more unit it has, the greater chance for success. McDonald's, it's logic. McDonald's has 6,000 franchises. It's been around since the 50s. You got to really be able to muck things up to mess up a McDonald's franchise, other than it's in a completely wrong place. And so what's the Mendoza line? The Mendoza line is about 4 years. 4 years is generally the line in which, I like how they say this is a double negative. You have a lower probability of failing, which translated backwards means you have a higher probability of succeeding. If a franchise system is at least 4 years old, then you have a higher probability of success. Now, all that stuff about Duncan Hines, survival is also more likely if the franchisor can attract a favorable rating from a third party. So somebody asked me in a class, what does a third party mean? A third party is an arbiter, someone who is arbitrary. A Duncan Hines is a classic example. He receives no money from advertisement. There's no place on there. He is as solitary as an oyster. His opinion is the only opinion that counts, and that's what a third party is. And that's also someone who is well respected in their given field. If you can get a third party to predict your success, it helps the franchisor gain an image as a legitimate player in the environment. If the industry writes you up as saying coming up and coming alive, then there's a better chance. This also means, unfortunately, that you leave open the area for charlatans who can buy their way into anything, who can make you think legitimately that they're just as good as anyone else. Look up Elizabeth Holtzman, and you'll understand what I mean. Theranos, okay? Survival is greater after 40th year, if this is a test question, and if you can attract a favorable rating from a third party. Now, the other parts that make franchises successful is if there is a solid cooperative relationship between themselves and the franchisor. When we get into talking about relationships, we'll talk about commitment trust theory, which is Morgan and Hunt's theory. Oops, doesn't want to finish with me today. Come on, backwards. Come on, come on. Thank you. Stay. Okay, all right. So you need to find a way of motivating the partners to increase the size of the franchise system. But franchises also give you a way of managing the inherent goal conflict. And so here's an example. Once again, the franchisor, you consider the manufacturer, wants to be able to have as many possible outlets as possible because they want to maximize sales. Standard stuff. Franchisees want to control area and maximize profits. We have the difficulty of a goal incongruity. The franchisor would like to put in the market area as many new outlets as they can, but those outlets potentially could encroach on existing places and ultimately cannibalize other businesses. And so, what is the solution for this? The solution is offer the new outlets to the franchisees that currently exist there. And this is where my friend Robert Huth made his success and has 57 Domino's franchises. I gotta get Bobby up here one day. Anyway, Robert. So here's the things or the trends in you need to maintain a cooperative atmosphere. You need to manage the inherent goal conflict that happens between the channel partners. And so if you do those things, you ultimately can achieve some greater success. What is the ultimate success for the franchisee? Robert Hughes could tell you, Bobby, it's multi-unit franchising. So if you see a question on the test that's asked, what is the ultimate or what has the greatest chance of success? You could have multiple answers that I would give you all 10 points, but one of them is certainly multi-unit franchising for the franchisee, that is, okay? So if I'm a franchisee and I have more than one outlet, all of a sudden, I have flexibility. I have breadth and width at the same time. The franchisor loves it. Bobby has 57 Domino franchises. Think about trying to manage 57 different organizations if you're Domino corporate. It reduces the enormous job of managing all of those relationships into one individual, Bobby. For Bobby as a franchisee, look what it does for him. All of these units are owned by him. There's congruity between it all. It allows all the units around them to be adjacent with each other, and just look at the transfer of information that comes across. You start a franchise in one location, you can transfer 2 experienced personnel, put them in that seat, and right away they start the ground running. You can take new trainees from this new area, bring them into the new or the older systems, the ones that have been running, teach them how to create success. And when they're well enough, either bring them back in or have them start their own franchises. It is a great way to achieve success, but you gotta get the second one. That's the hard thing. This is a silly thing to say, but they say the hardest thing to make is your first million, all right? Everything else falls after that, you know? The hardest thing is to get there. But once you get there, if you're in the right place at the right time, multi-unit franchising pays off, and it will pay off perpetually, all right? And so these major reasons. The franchisor gets one individual to work with who encompasses a broad area and has a general knowledge of the area they're in. For the franchisee, they have the ability of spreading their wealth over multiple. It means also if they're running low in one place, they can ship supplies to another. It just everything good that you can think about it happens from this. And so multi-unit franchising is probably the best way. Now, here's the interesting thing about Chick-fil-A. I just want to say this before we end, because it just kind of gives you an idea. Chick-fil-A has 4,600 franchises in the United States, but they're the #1 producer of income per individual store in the world. Okay. Chick-fil-A only allows you to own one store. You cannot make more than 50% of your earned income from any other source than Chick-fil-A. Don't worry, you'll be taken care of, okay? It only cost $4,000 for the franchise fee for Chick-fil-A. But the review process takes 2.5 years. So they're looking for the right people. So if you want to get into a Chick-fil-A, just be the right person, be willing to take the time, and you too can be manning those drive-through windows if you want to, okay? All right, before we go, so let's see, close a couple things here. So before I go on, I just wanted to show you, this is my dad. This was in 2010 when I was getting my PhD. Dad come in and stopped by. Dad was 85 at the time, or 84, I can't remember. So he drove. Yeah, he's a guy who drives a lot. And I talked about going down to see him on Veterans Day. So this was Dad when he was 16 years old. When he was 16 years old, he joined the Merchant Marines in 1942, and he sailed through the Pacific to Guadalcanal as a 16-year-old. So what were you doing when you were 16? This was the first suit he ever owned in his life. It was actually the first new thing he ever had. He was one of 8 children, and he did this to serve his country. In 1943, off the coast of Iran, his ship was struck by a German Stuka that a shrapnel tore open his head and for a while made him temporarily crazy. He said he was all right. There was actually a cook on ship from Mississippi who saved Dad's life, got him off the ship. They were on a hospital truck going towards Iran, and it was a World War I with no suspension, and the bouncing was going to kill my dad. And the cook held him in his arms all the way. So this was him at 21 after the war, kind of a different man after seeing all of that. And so he went on after this, and there he is right there, rather dapper guy. He's what we would call dapper now. You'd also call him a clothes horse, because he never grew up with anything. He wanted to be able to, show off and really look well, and he always did. I mean, that was Dad. So he became a captain. He moved through the Merchant Marines. He became an ensign in the U.S. Navy Reserve, and then in the 50s he worked on tugboats. But then he started working on steamboats on the 50s. So that's Dad. He's a handsome guy, really is. So in Vietnam, they asked him to come be the port captain at Cam Ranh Bay. And so he served in Vietnam from 67 to 69, and he tripled tonnage coming into Vietnam at that time. He was a civilian. He didn't have a rank, but he worked his way through. He came back to the United States, and he achieved the highest rank that you can do as a merchant seaman. He was what's called a master mariner, which means that in terms of limitations, on his card it said unlimited tonnage, unlimited waters. I always said I could only equal it. And so this is him on the bridge of the Iwo Jima, which is a transportation, helicopter transportation ship. The Navy always had this interesting way of coming into New Orleans between February and April, like Mardi Gras time. I mean, nobody knows why, but they did. So Dad was the one who always parked the naval vessels, and he always got to talk to the people up on the decks. So there's the captain and the XO, and they're pulling in. This is actually, if you notice, that's the French Quarter. So they're pulling right into the Julia Street Wharf. I believe that's right. And so this last picture of Dad parked super tankers, large vessels, and I always asked him, Dad, how did you do it? And he said, I never got in a hurry. He never put himself in a position where he had to take a risk. And that's amazing, but I've tried to hold to that. And so this last picture, he piloted a submarine on the river. No other pilot on the river wanted to touch it because submarine moves in 3 dimensions. And so this is my favorite picture of Dad. So here he is. That's the conning tower of the submarine. So this is him with his world-class mustache, his walkie-talkie to talk down the river, and he's piloting this submarine while he's smoking a cigar at the same time. I mean, that's just badass to me. So anyway, I hope you all have a good Veterans Day. If you have veterans, please thank them, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
You bet.